Welcome to my third video on the London system, and this video will give you a good basis for everything you need to know with playing white. Basically, if you've watched the first two videos, then this is basically the last thing you need to know. Now a quick lowdown on what the other videos, which you can find in my collection GingerGM videos, deal with. Well, the first video deals with pretty much everything that can happen after d4, d5. I say pretty much because there's one line in this video we will look at. The second video deals with setups after d4 where black plays g6, so knight f6, so then after bishop f4, g6. So that's the second video. And again, to look at these videos, I recommend you watch them first before you watch this video. This is the last video in the series, and it's just aiming to cover most things you need to know. But this video is going to cover the very important line, knight to f6, and now bishop to f4, and here c5. And this has a great deal of independent value, and we're going to the pros and cons of this move very shortly. Now, I would like to remind you that I have filmed a long DVD for ChessBase on the London system. I think it's about 6 hours long, and that's due to be released, I believe, in I think March or April, but ChessBase are in charge of this, so I don't know. But it'll be in the next couple of months, and I recommend obviously you buy that video, ching ching, but also, if you want to be serious, it will help you out. Now, these videos will give you a good overview, but if you want to look at it in more detail, obviously a 6-hour video really goes into much more detail, so that will really give you everything you need to know. But I'm aiming to give you really a 5-step plan for each of these setups, and after maybe an hour's viewing, you'll be very well prepared with the London system. That's what I'm trying to do here for free, to try to give you a good opening for white. Now, c5 is a move that is very sharp, and this video is maybe aimed at slightly higher rated players, because this move c5, I don't think you'll encounter that often at lower rating, at club, beginner club level. But at higher level, top Grandmaster level, it's a very common and move to encounter, and you need to know what to do. Now, the problem here is I would love to create my pyramid again, as I do in video 1, by playing either e3 or c3. But the issue here is, after either of these moves, e3 or c3, let's take e3 to start with, black has a very good reply. And this is always a move you need to watch out for in the London system. And that move is queen to b6. Now, in the first video, you probably recall that we had good ways of meeting this move because we're better developed. But queen to b6 here, we haven't got very good development as white, and it's a very annoying move. So this is one of the reasons why an early c5 from black should be treated with some respect. And how do we deal with our b2 pawn now? Now, a move I don't want to play is b3, because this weakens the dart squares. It's a bit of an uncomfortable move to play. We're not going to get any advantage. Now, Kamsky has tried the line knight to c3 here, a pawn sack line. But after queen takes b2, I can't see anything more than a draw if black is well prepared. For example, you can try knight b5, and this may lead you to a number of quick wins if black's not sure about what he's doing. But black has a very good move here, knight d5. And this is a very good move because it guards the threat. And in some cases, we have knight c3. In some cases, knight takes bishop. And white's best choice here is rook b1 and rook a1, and just to repeat the position and get a draw. I think everything else is a bit dubious scientifically. So if you want to get a forced draw, let's say you're playing someone a lot higher rated, then after the moves bishop f4, remember you should know this setup from the first video, so I'm not going to repeat why this is the way you should play, c5. e3 is not a bad setup. But if you're trying to get an advantage, I don't think it's good enough. And the same goes for c3 here. again, we're trying to create our pyramid, but after queen b6, we have a problem, the same problem. How do we defend b2? We normally meet queen b6 with which move? This was in the first video. Queen b3. This is the idea we normally want to play. But in this position, I find this slightly dubious because black has pawn takes d4. And we either have to swap queens or take on d4. And then in this position, well, black can always just capture this pawn. And I don't think the compensation is enough here for white. So my recommendation and rule 1 is that if black plays c5 on move 1 or 2, we must advance with d5. This is the only way we can aim to get an opening advantage. Again, I could have copped out and given you a simple setup with e3, but then omitting black's best moves. I'm trying to give you the best setup, the setup I will play, and the setup I believe in, and which is best. So against c5, we have to advance with d5. This move d5 is the most demanding on black's position. So this is the first rule. If we are faced with c5, even on move 1, I think we should go d5. This is better. Move 1's slightly different because here we can play our normal triangle setup because queen b6 is not a worry anymore because our bishop guards b2. So it's mainly on move 2 we should advance with d5. And this is the type of position we're concentrating on in this video. Now, the point of this video is to give you a comfortable setup with this. Now, I must admit, this is a much harder thing to learn, these kind of positions as white, than the previous 2 videos. But it has to be done. Chess is not an easy game, and you have to learn some of the more difficult things eventually. Why is it more difficult? Because if you want to get an opening advantage, you have to take risks in this variation, you have to play some tactical lines, and you have to be willing to sacrifice a pawn. For example here, what should black play? Black has a number of options. Now, let's have a look first of all at d6. This is very popular at club level, but I believe after this move, we have a nice safe way to gain a space advantage and a small edge, and that is by simple development. So what should we do here? Well, I think we should go knight c3 because this supports our center, and after a move from black, normally g6, we can get a pawn to e4. Now, the one advantage of this on other Benoni positions is that we don't have a pawn on c4. Now, what I mean by that is if you have a look at this position, and then a main line, what we call Benoni opening, occurs after some setup with c4. We're not playing this in the London system. We don't go c4 except for very rare variations. And after c5 now, so it's black's same principle, we get some positions here where, well, normally e6 is played, and you get an exchange here, and you get something like this. Now, the big difference here is that black has swapped an e-pawn for a c-pawn. And one of the advantages in our setup, so let's go through the moves we're playing after c5, and remember rule 1, we meet this with d5 if it occurs early. And now if black plays very quietly, trying to get a Benoni setup, Benoni is where he fianchettos on the king side. If we just play knight c3 and we leave our pawn on c2, this is the main difference. I like having this pawn here. Now, why? Because later on, one of the main squares black often tries to come into in the Benoni is d4. Black often tries to get a bishop, or later on either a knight, to this square. Now, if this happens here, we can always kick the piece away by going pawn to c3. Very important idea. Pawn to c3 will also blunt out the bishop on g7. So I think these positions should be slightly better for white, and you just continue in standard fashion. Now, the way I'd play here is with queen d2. And this gives you the option, if you want to, of being very aggressive, as in the second video, the last video I did on this London system. Again, you can see that in the archives. And a couple of things we should remember in these setups is, well, you've always got to pay attention to what your opponent moves. If he plays a6, I recommend a4. We want to stop b5. Pay attention to what he's doing, stop his ideas. And now we just want to continue our development, get castled, and later on, one of the main moves in this position is e5. e5, and we'll come back to where these rules fit in later on, but I want to give you a quick overview of the main lines first. So really, if black plays slowly after d5, if he goes g6, if he goes d6, if he plays slowly, we develop by leaving our pawn on c2 with knight c3, e4. Then we try to get castle kingside, normally is safer. And then later on, the main advance we play is e4, e5. This is your main middle game plan. So what else can black play? Well, black can try to do something a bit more tricky. What, for example, about queen b6? This has been the problem with the other variations. This is one of the main ideas that black has against the London system. Can he play it with pawn on d5? Well, now we come to rule 2. And I believe if you want to get an advantage in these variations, you must be willing to sacrifice. And rule 2 is, in these sharp lines, you must be willing to sacrifice a pawn. So in this position here, I think the best move is knight to c3, allowing your opponent to take on b2. And if he does take on b2, well, now we can play bishop d2. And this leads to very entertaining play. And, well, there's a number of games in this. The point is, again, we just build up our centre. We go for e4, e5, and black has lost a lot of time. He has to move his queen back again, and he's wasted something like 4 tempo. And there's a rule in chess, quite a useful rule. If your opponent has to waste 3 or 4 tempo grabbing one of your pawns, that's normally a very good investment. And for example here, bishop d2 is correct because we're guarding our knight. We want to go rook b1. The queen should probably try to get out of dodge now, queen b6. And here, like before, we build our centre, e4. Given a chance, we will go e5. So d6 makes sense. And here we want to increase as much pressure as we can. And one of the rules we'll come to, and we've already mentioned, is e4, e5. Well, here you have time to repair that with f4. And you're using this very big centre. And this should give white fantastic compensation for one pawn. You have moves like rook b1, you develop quickly, and later on you try to play e5. Now, if e5 from black, this is the only way that black can stop you going e5. Again, quick development. Knight to f3, and now after something like knight d7, we can even take on e5. And here, again, just finish your development. Rook b1 gaining a tempo, bishop c4, and we can castle using our open f-file to attack. And this gives great attacking play. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this because, again, you know, my DVD does cover these things in more detail. In a YouTube video, I'll try not to bore you. I want to get the points across as quickly as I can. So basically, against queen b6, you should be willing to sacrifice a pawn with knight c3. And if he takes it, you just guard your knight and continue with e4, e5. Now, that also goes true for other lines after queen b6, knight c3. If e6 here, well, again, we should try to stabilize our pawn. One thing to do is keep that pawn on d5 by playing e4. And now, black can take on e4. This is a little tactical idea, and follow up with queen b4 check. But again, if we're following rule 2, you have to be willing to sacrifice a pawn. It's only a pawn. And if we're going to sacrifice a pawn to force our opponent's queen to dart around the board, that's okay, because then he's going to start playing like a beginner. He's going to waste a lot of time. And here, there's a number of ways to get compensation. I think the best move here is actually queen d2. And after queen takes knight check, knight to e2. And I want to castle queenside and go knight to c3. And you can look at this in more detail yourselves, but I've checked this with a computer and it indicates white has fantastic compensation. So really, these are the basic things to learn. But one thing to bear in mind throughout these 3 videos on the London system is, and this is very important, you have to remain flexible. Remain flexible. You must be flexible. Now, this means you should change your setup depending on what black plays. And one thing I find so many beginners do, and even people who are up to 2000 strength, is they don't look at their opponent's moves. They're crazy. I mean, a funny story, someone who watched my first video on the London system was then faced with a setup with G6 and Bishop G7. And he had looked at my second video, but I think only artificially. And he lost the game horribly because he did the same setup I recommended in my first video out of 3. Oh, this is the third one, against the video he should have done in the second setup. And this just shows you that you can't do the same moves willy-nilly. You have to look at what your opponent plays and adapt. That's what chess is about. Look at your opponent's moves. Remain flexible. Adapt to what he does. And these 3 videos should give you all the clues to be able to do that in a good way. But you must be flexible in chess to become a better player. And this player sort of said, well, I followed all your stuff, but then I said, well, what did your opponent play? And he's go, oh, I don't know. And it's like, well, if you don't know what your opponent plays, how are you supposed to... You can't just play the same moves all the time. You can often, but you have to be flexible. And in this particular setup against c5, you just must remember to go d5, rule 1. And the 4th rule, the middle game plan, which is very important. Let's just go through some of the moves here. Example, in, let's say, this position... this pawn sack line. Well, after doing some natural developing moves, the next rule is, and this occurs in a lot of these positions, remember e4, e5, this central pawn push, this is rule 4, is the key idea. You must remember this idea. So just to show you in a practical sense this idea, in this position here, black is behind in development, and because of that, the move e5 in the early middle game here will give white a very devastating attack. Very good attacking chances. And this is a key idea. And the last thing I want to just mention to you is, okay, slightly different setup now. And this, I just remembered this after doing my first video. What happens in the London system if black tries to copy you? And a couple of people have asked questions here. So if d5... Bishop f4, bishop f5. What should we do against this setup? So after this move, bishop b5, bishop f5, excuse me, I think a good way of meeting this setup, and this again is breaking some of the rules we looked at earlier, but this goes back to rule number 3, be flexible. Your opponent has put his bishop on f5 very early. What could be the downside of that move? Well, the downside of this move, and this really reflects the downside of us putting our bishop on f4 too quickly. What was the downside of us putting our bishop on f4, which has been demonstrated throughout this video? Well, the downside is that often black has this queen b6 move threatening b2. So why don't we now try to do that to black? And I think the best way to play against the copycat line is to now transpose back into a c4 line. Play c4 quickly. Try to punish black for playing this line and leaving b7 a bit exposed. What we want to do is play a quick queen b3 and attack that square. Now, you can, after this move, play in the pyramid setup, which actually Magnus Carlsen did. But I think that, you know, Magnus Carlsen played e3, e6, and actually here he went bishop d3, swapping off these pieces. You can play like this, but it's a bit boring, and you have to be Magnus Carlsen to get any real edge. I like the idea of c4. This is the only case in the London system where I recommend you go c4. Because after something like c6, well, now let's develop a piece first, knight c3. And if black goes for something like e6, well, the whole point of this is we go queen b3, because we're trying to take advantage of the fact that black's bishop has moved away from the defense of b7. And if queen b6, we now see a normal idea, and this is something that black often does to us, but here we have a bishop on f4, and this really helps us, c5. This helps us because black cannot go queen c7, which we do as white in these variations. Hopefully you can remember that from the first video, because our bishop guards that square. And after an exchange of b3, one of the most important concepts you must remember to play is to try to go b4, b5 quickly. For example, knight d7, b4. And if here, a6, we can still go b5. And this gives us a very nice position. We're taking advantage of the pin on the a file. Now, really, that's all I want to do in this video, and we'll go over the rules one more time. And the main setup we have been looking at is after an early c5. So knight f6, and here c5. Now, if black plays c5 and move 1, remember, move 1 or 2, I would recommend you play d5 straight away. So this is move 2, d5 here. Why do we do this? Because we can't go for our pyramid setup because black has the annoying move queen b6. But if he goes queen b6 now, we can gambit a pawn, and this comes to rule 2. You must be willing to sacrifice a pawn. Let's say he tries to do this in a position. So if he plays queen b6 now, the difference is because we have a pawn on d5, we can gambit the pawn, and our pawn on d5 gives us a real dagger in black's position. It's very advanced. It's a very good basis for an attack. And remember, to do all these lines, you've got to remain flexible. So pay real attention to what your opponent plays. You've got to adapt to his moves. And another thing you must remember, and this is one thing that the pawn on d5 gives us a great chance of doing, is we have this middle game plan of e4, e5. This is like our right hook. Our right hook or right jab straight through the middle of the board. Straight through the middle. So e4, e5, use this break. And lastly, if our opponent does the copycat variation with bishop f5, this is a different kind of setup, we should go for an early c4, because with this move c4, if we go back, we aim for a quick queen b3, trying to take advantage of this pawn. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that video. That's my last video I'm going to do on the London system. Do keep an eye out for my DVD. I mean, if you include the 3 videos I've done this, you've probably got about an hour and a half's tuition on this opening, which is pretty good, you know, Grandmaster tuition. But the DVD will be 6 hours, and it'll be much more in-depth. It will take you to that next level, and it will go into much more detail. I'm going to also be streaming tomorrow. So this is Monday. I'm putting this video out. Tuesday tomorrow, 7 p.m. GMT. So if you want to join into some more tuition, there's the times I'm going to be streaming. And that is 7 p.m. in England, 8 p.m. in Central Europe, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can catch me on my Twitch channel. And if you want to get a notification of when I do stream in future, then you will see in the notes below the video there is a Twitch address. And if you just click, if you go to that address and you subscribe to my Twitch channel, you'll get notifications anytime I'm doing a lesson. And tomorrow I'm going to be doing a more basic, I would say, informative thing. So you'll get a free lesson from a Grandmaster if you tune in for that. And normally Grandmasters charge at least $50 an hour, up to $200 an hour to get that lesson. So you'll be getting a free lesson from me if you tune in to that broadcast tomorrow. I'm going to keep the topic secret because I don't know what it is yet, but I promise you it will be informative. My main goal today has been to get this video out. You can also see that throughout this video I've given a link to the GingerGM newsletter. And that will give you lots of updates on special offers, good deals, and things like when the London System DVD will actually be coming out. So I suggest you subscribe to the newsletter. It's only going to come out every couple of weeks, and it'll just give you more information about good free stuff that you'll be able to get, really. So thank you so much for watching this. Please like, please subscribe, and I hope this helps you really to get some good games of the London System. I'm doing this to help you guys. I've had lots of good feedback about these videos, and good luck. Goodbye for now.